So essentially what this talk is an event in connection with an online exhibition that just got launched at the Hunterian called The Roman World in 10 Tokens. I've just put a link in the chat. If you have kind of QR capability, you can also use the QR code on the screen. So essentially how this came about is in 2019, November 2019, I emailed Jesper, who's the curator here at the Hunterian, and said, I think you have some Roman tokens I'd like to come and look at. And he's like, I think we do. And I came up and he tells me probably no one had looked at them since 1794 when they had been in the possession of William Hunter. And so then, we kind of then developed that into this. And so what the exhibition shows is kind of like 10 highlights from the collection of tokens at the Hunterian. And really, I think I chose the specimens to kind of illustrate what tokens can tell us about the Roman world. So essentially, the Roman tokens, we can think of them in kind of similar ways to the way that we have tokens today. So we might, for example, encounter a token Asda. This is from the Hunterian collection, the Asda token. People might be pleased to know that's already in record to vote. Or, for instance, at the Hunterian, I don't know if this is still the case, but last time I was at the Hunterian, you had to buy a locker token to be able to use a locker because they were all based on the old pound coins, and no one had those anymore. So you had to pay £1 to get a token to use the locker. We also use tokens, for instance, I live in Coventry, so I quite often go to the Birmingham Christmas market where you have to pay a deposit for your cup. You get the Christmas token or fund that you carry around and then give back at the end. So the same sorts of ideas in the Roman world, these are monetiform objects, so objects that look like coins, but they're not actually official currency. And essentially, they've kind of gone through a series of rediscoveries, particularly the lead tokens that we have from Rome. So essentially, they kind of really began to come to light during the dredging of the Tiber in Rome to put the banks to stop the Tiber flooding. And while they were dredging the Tiber, thousands of lead tokens kind of came out of the ground. And they were studied by Rostovtsev as part of his Habilitationsschrift. So this is kind of the second PhD that some academics undertake. And he published a catalogue that was in Latin in 1903, which has now actually been translated into English and is now available online for consultation. And Rostovtsev also wrote a commentary where he kind of lamented how horrible these things were to work with and how he wished perhaps he hadn't undertaken the work. But those of you who are perhaps academics might understand that by the time you come to the end of a piece of research, you might be cursing its very existence. So Rostovtsev kind of said, oh, enough. But after Rostovtsev, then actually Roman tokens, particularly lead ones, they get forgotten again. And so really what I and other people who've been working at Warwick have been doing is trying to kind of bring them back again into public consciousness, academic consciousness. So what I'm going to talk about today are the tokens from Rome and Ostia. These are the ones that William Hunter had in his collection. But I just want to flag that what the tokens look like in Rome and Ostia are very different to what tokens look like elsewhere in the Mediterranean. Essentially, each local city or area, not all of them struck tokens or made tokens, but each kind of city had their own kind of style, material approach. So for instance, in Palmyra, the tokens are made out of clay in the main, terracotta. They're different shape and they have a very different sort of style and design to what we're going to look at here. In the Roman world, tokens, in Roman Ostia, tokens are made out of either bronze or brass. So I've got on the slide there a really wonderful token showing a portrait of Augustus at the top. That's a bronze one in the Hunterian Museum. Or they're made out of lead and they're cast from molds. And I've got an example of that below, a winged caduceus style. I'm just trying to find how to change my slide. There we go. So as I mentioned, the lead tokens were cast, and they're cast from molds. This is an example of a mold from the Vatican. And so yeah, you would carve in one side the designs, one on each side, put the mold together, and then pour the lead through. What you have on the screen is also an example where you can see the result of the casting. It's been discarded. That was found in Ostia. We also get in the archaeological record these kind of remnants of lead where they've broken off all the tokens, and then, yeah, essentially kind of discarded the lead at the end for excavators to find. So what I wanted to do in this very short talk today is kind of highlight how we can use tokens to uncover different aspects about the Roman world, and also kind of, as I say, highlight some of the specimens in the Hunterian. So I wanted to begin by talking about the imperial image. So tokens which could be issued by the emperor or could be issued by other people, individuals or groups, really offer us this wonderful insight into how people visualized the emperor. So for instance, under Augustus, on this token we have on the top, we have Augustus, and behind him we have the bust of Livia. So this kind of, let's say, side-by-side approach of portraiture is called Jugate. And essentially what's fascinating is on official Roman coins during the reign of the Emperor Augustus, Livia, his wife, never appears. We can discuss that later. But on tokens, she does. So clearly whoever created this token thought that she was a really important part of the imperial image to represent. The other example I've put below is a representation of Drusus the Younger. This is the son of Tiberius. He was one of the heirs to the throne for a while, and he's shown here looking very sort of heroic and full of military valor, let's say, seen from the back with a spear here, probably commemorating his success in Illyricum, where he'd been commanding some forces. And so what we find on tokens then in the Roman world is essentially visions of members of the imperial family or visions of the emperor that we don't normally find elsewhere. So members of the imperial family who may not be shown on coins, for instance, they do appear on tokens. So these brass or bronze tokens would have been struck. We think it would have been at one particular workshop in Rome. We know it's just one workshop because they kind of shared stamps for the striking. But there are also, as I mentioned, lead tokens, which represent the emperor as well. And what's kind of fascinating about these is they again show different understandings of the imperial image than we find elsewhere. So this particular coin has what I've called a bad portrait of Nero. This is in fact Nero on the token. You may not, it may not look like your vision of Nero, but it is. And we know it's Nero because he's kind of got, the name is kind of inscribed around the outside there. And so what I love about this actually is this bad portrait of Nero kind of connects to what we know about how portraiture or in the imperial portrait worked in the Roman world. So although we might have in our museums lovely marble busts, we do know, for instance, from this text of Fronto to the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, Fronto was his tutor, saying, look, there's actually just all throughout Rome a whole lot of portraits that look nothing like you. And here we kind of get a really lovely example of that, a case where the emperor's portrait doesn't really look like the emperor and is clearly made by individuals or groups outside kind of the official government with its skilled artisans. On the other side of the token, we've got this reference in the Latin to Nero being part, basically, of the Claudian family, which again, this kind of particular iteration, or representation is something that we don't find, for instance, on coinage. He's given different titles on official coinage. So yeah, just to kind of illustrate, tokens, essentially, particularly the lead ones, could be made by a wide variety of groups. And the molds that we have for these tokens are dispersed throughout Rome and Ostia. So clearly manufacture was dispersed, which we do see in the varying, let's say, quality of the tokens. Many of them kind of look like stick figures. So for this example, we have an elephant with an elephant rider, a mahout. Perhaps some of you in the audience could do a better job than the person who's created this one. I probably couldn't actually. And on the other side, a reference to the emperor with the legend Augustus. Some other tokens, however, are much nicer in style. And this is an example here from the Flavian dynasty, which shows the emperor Vespasian and his two sons, Titus and Domitian. And what's wonderful about this token is that whoever has made it has obviously taken inspiration from official Roman coinage. This is a specimen of the coin type that's in the Hunterian. You can see the two sons here facing each other. On the token, however, there has been some alteration. Whereas on the coin, they're both bareheaded. On the token, they're both wearing laurel wreaths. And there's a very well-placed imp at the top, which seems to suggest that both of them have been kind of given the title imperator, which is not anything that we find during the reign of Vespasian. So someone here is kind of taken a coin image and taken it further, in fact. And one of the wonderful things actually about lead tokens is that they do show that people were paying attention to coinage. I know I might convert to that idea, but like a lot of people say, well, who was even looking at the coins anyway, Claire? But the tokens really show that people were paying attention and adapting what they saw for their own creations. Another theme that we get out of lead tokens are scenes that are connected to games and festivals. And what's kind of wonderful about the tokens that we have is that many of them seem to be kind of directly addressed to participants or audience members. So on this particular token, we've got two kind of spectators applauding, with a head of Juno Sospita on the other side. So Juno Sospita is a goddess, a kind of a different form of the goddess Juno, local to Lanuvium, which was an area just outside of Rome. She's characterized by wearing a goat skin headdress. But on the other side, we do have these spectators applauding, and we know that tokens were used in particular contexts for games, to distribute prizes, to distribute drinks, to distribute food. And so the people making these tokens are using them to try and prompt reactions from the audience. So here they're saying, please do applaud at the appropriate moment. And we do also find this kind of, let's say, anxiety about whether the crowd are going to behave at a particular event in ancient texts. So Suetonius tells us in his Life of Nero that when Nero was performing, see, it was Nero in the theatre, there does seem to have been some anxiety about how the crowd would react. And so he trained a whole bunch of people, equestrians and plebeians, to applaud whenever he performed. So he would kind of place them all in the audience and be like, you will applaud at the appropriate moment, prompting everyone else to applaud. So I think that's what's going on with these types of tokens here. It's prompting people to act in a particular way during a particular event. And we see a similar phenomenon here with this bronze token that clearly is connected to the Roman triumph. So we've got on the token the chant that soldiers kind of shouted during a Roman triumph. So a triumph is when you have the kind of the victorious, well, in the imperial period, the victorious emperor on a chariot, all the soldiers going through Rome, all the goods that have been kind of gathered as war booty, all the captives. It was a magnificent sight. And as the soldiers go through, they shout, yo, yo, triumphe, again and again. And that chant, this soundscape, is captured on the token, which is inviting the person who has the token to either shout the chant themselves or to hear it echoing in their heads. So we have a lower branch on this token, and on the other side, it's traditionally been described as horseshoes, but these aren't horseshoes. These are armbands and a torque that were military honors given to soldiers who had really distinguished themselves in battle. And we find these kind of represented. I've just put one example here of a tombstone of a soldier who died during the famous Varian disaster. It was a bad defeat for the Romans. But you can see here, he's wearing his kind of torques on his shoulder. He's got the armbands. And it's a representation of a military honor. Also connected to the idea of a Roman triumph is this token, which is possibly my favorite token in the Hunterian, which shows the victorious military general, the triumphator, in his chariot, but the chariot is on a camel. And instead of having a slave behind him whispering, remember you're human, remember you're human, this particular representation has a monkey doing that with a very long tail, you can see, which kind of, I think, makes the entire piece a satire of Roman triumph. And what we do find from Roman tokens is really a sense of humor, a sense of joy, a sense of fun that we may not necessarily find on other material culture from the Roman world. And it's probably because tokens are used during festivals and sort of ceremonies where people are at leisure, there's a lot of fun things happening. So they really do capture this sense of joy. You might have noticed on many of the bronze and brass tokens in particular, there are numbers on them. We actually have no idea what function the numbers served. It's one of the kind of great quagmires of tokens that remains as yet unresolved. Perhaps we'll never be able to resolve it. Tokens also show this wonderful interaction with broader objects and kind of statues in the Roman world. So in the Hunterian, there's this wonderful piece. It looks a bit like a stick figure, I will admit. But if you look closely at the positioning of the hands, we have essentially a representation of this very famous statue of Venus, where she's coming out of the bath and she goes to cover herself and doesn't quite manage it, really. And so whoever has made this token is really referencing this very particular cult statue. On the other side of this token, we have the goddess Fortuna, and she's a very popular type for Roman tokens, and probably because she's connected to this idea of wealth and good fortune. But we know also that tokens could be distributed at particular events by essentially throwing them into the crowd. If you're sponsoring games, for instance, there comes a moment, or in the theatre, where you'll take the tokens you've made and hurl them into the crowd, and whoever managed to get one gets a prize. So I think Fortuna here has a very sort of significant role because it's about good luck in that sense. So tokens could be created by emperors, they could be created by magistrates, they could be created by individuals, but we also have tokens connected to associations. And this one, I think, is a token probably created by a cultic association that worshipped Hadrian's dead lover, Antinous. And we've got that from the Antenoi here. We know that these types of associations existed elsewhere from inscriptional evidence, and probably in these associations, tokens are used for local banquets or sort of, events that they're having within their membership to kind of mediate who gets what food, who's going to what feast, to sort of also mediate distribution. They also show associations of a different nature, particularly workers' associations. And so I've got, let's say, a censored image here. So if you're going to be offended by erotic imagery, now is the time to close your eyes. For everyone else, I'm going to reveal the image. There it is. It's not so bad, actually. But I'm going to now cover it up again in case. There we go. So anyone who has closed their eyes can now reopen them. This token, so sexual imagery was very popular on tokens, and these are perhaps the best studied tokens. They're called spintrii, and they show a variety of erotic scenes. But what I'm interested in this particular token is about the representation on the reverse, the other side, where we have a representation essentially of the porters of Ostia, those who are carrying the amphora and sort of all the things that are coming into the port, off the ships into the warehouses. And so there are quite a few tokens connected to this group. And so it gives us this wonderful insight into sort of workers' associations and identity. Tokens continue into late antiquity. So these are just a few examples of what they look like as we go into the late antique period. They're largely connected with the festival of Isis, which is connected to the sailing season in Rome, a very important festival, and they come to have Christian imagery as well. But the token I wanted to end on is a really special token, I think, that essentially was issued by the last ordinary consul of Rome. And he flees Rome as it falls and he goes to Constantinople. This token is wonderful in that it's made out of bronze and it has silver as well on it. It's a really expensive piece. And this is one token of a sort of broader series that are created in the 6th century, where people, elite Romans who sponsor the repair of buildings, make mementos or invites that are very expensive to give out to people in memory of that. So Rome was being sacked quite a bit by this period. There was a lot of renovations that had to take place. And this, which was a previously kind of unknown item, is one of these created by Basilius, as I mentioned, the last ordinary consul of Rome. So tokens really then do continue all the way up, basically to the fall of Rome, if we're going to call it that. So this is just kind of a brief insight into, what tokens can reveal and what some of the tokens in the Hunterian can reveal. They really do offer us this glimpse into particular moments in the Roman world. And although I've just shown you 10 here, there are thousands, that exist actually. So there's a lot of information we can gain from them. And I'll just say, if we can end by just thinking about like the roles that tokens even play in our own lives, it's kind of wonderful to think about. I don't know how many of you know, but when you pay with a card with a chip in it, the whole process is done via tokens. So yeah, we are perhaps probably returning to a world where we don't have money, but we are now using tokens. So I will end my talk there and open up to questions if people have any. Yeah, but it's just a whirlwind tour, so to speak.
Thank you so much, Claire. That was great.